We're going to wait for a few more people to come on in. I see that we're growing a bit. Thank you for coming to the Right Within book tour tonight. We have to say happy book birthday to the paperback edition of Right Within, How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace by Minda Harts. And we are Source Booksellers here in Detroit, Michigan. We are a niche of nonfiction books. We are run by two Black women, so we are very excited to hear from the ladies today and to also keep this book on our shelves. We still have a few of the hardcover if you're interested in gifting, but we really, really, really feel that this topic is very important for all women of color at work. And so I'll just do a quick introduction as people are coming in. Our author today, Minda Harts, is a workplace and equity consultant. She is also the best-selling author and award-winning author of The Memo. You may know that one. And also, she wrote You Are More Than Magic. Minda is a highly sought after speaker for companies such as Liberty Mutual, Nike, Salesforce, Google. And in 2020, she was named the top voice for equity in the workplace by LinkedIn. And if you are into listening to podcasts, please sign up and start to listen to her weekly podcast, which is live, and it is called Secure Your Seat. To find her on Instagram or Twitter, you're just going to use her name, Minda Harts. Jennifer Daniels is a shining light here in Detroit. She designs, builds, and invests in Black innovation. Jennifer consults with entrepreneurial ecosystems on how to equitably support sustainable and scalable businesses of under-resourced founders here in Detroit. She built Color Stock. If you're not aware of it, it is the first diverse stock photography marketplace, and the Detroit Human Capital, a micro investment vehicle for Detroit's people, places, and purpose. And so let's meet them both.
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to step out and maybe Minda, you'll read a little bit from the book.
Yes, I will. And then me and Jennifer will get into a hearty discussion on what it means to be right within, or how to heal, how to get some healing in our body. So thank you all for joining us. You could be anywhere tonight and you're here with us. So thank you so much. And for those who will watch the replay after. So I'm going to read out of the first chapter. It's entitled, I Can't Give Up Now. And I use a piece of the Mary Mary song, Can't Give Up Now. Nobody told me the road would be easy. I have always been the only Black woman in the room, meaning in the course of my career, I was the only Black woman in the boardroom and the only Black woman in the break room. And I hate to admit to you that at times it was a lonely journey. I've eaten way too many lunches alone. I started to settle into the microaggressions and the bias that so effortlessly tended to greet me at any given time during my workday. I don't know how many times I told myself that Bob didn't mean any harm and neither did Kim. Maybe you have created the same fairy tale so that you could get through your workday too. The crazy thing about this narrative is that I began to believe it. In my previous career, I started to feed myself tablespoons of BS little by little over 15 years. And the more of that, and doing that didn't bring me any peace. It only resulted in me questioning my self-worth. I spent a lot of time questioning if what I was experiencing at work was in fact racism, or if I was just reading too much into the situation. I would question if my colleagues were just joking or being a jerk, or if they were being ignorant. All of that led to even more questioning, especially toward myself. I believe systemic racism was created to make people of color question themselves. Now, before you go any further in this book, One thing you should know about me from the jump is I'm going to keep it real with you. If I'm going to get vulnerable with you about my journey to healing from workplace trauma, in return, I hope that you're willing to be vulnerable and unpack your racialized baggage along with me so that you can be right within. Please don't pretend that you forgot that famous song, Bag Lady by Erykah Badu. One day, all those bags going to get in your way, so pack light. I realized that this song might not have been talking exclusively about racialized work trauma, but Miss Badu wasn't wrong. I don't know about you, but there was a time in the not so distant past where I had all kinds of workplace trauma in my bags. And to be very clear, my trauma wasn't tucked in a fancy designer handbag. My baggage was so battered and strained, it started to look like those old cheap plastic grocery bags that could rip up at any moment. When we don't know what to do with those burdens, we sometimes try to deny they exist, only making matters worse. And that's just a little bit of Right Within.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Minda. And what up, though? Because we're not physically in Detroit, but we are in the D, baby. And so I got to say what up, though, to you. So I just want to let you all know that Minda and I met on the internet a long time ago. And like literally when you were in the process of writing, I think it was the memo. And so I'm so excited that you were able to find a niche in that space, because it really opened some stuff up for me when I read it, right? And I shared it with my mom. She was, she was in the blue, gray, black suit skirt period of the 80s and the 90s at work. And I shared a copy with her too. And she was just like, oh my gosh, it's like Amen Corner. So just kudos to you showing up in this space, showing up as your full self, and inspiring people like myself to tell their stories when it comes to work. And so let's just get right into it. Okay, so the dedication in the book. Tell us why you dedicated Right Within to Black women.
Yes, that's a great first question. And I'm going to read the dedication because I'm sure we got some Black women who are going to be watching or who are watching right now. And I just have to, this is the problem, Jennifer, with, since we're keeping it real, when you wear lashes, you can barely see sometimes. So I dedicate this book to Black women who were told that they had to be strong for everybody but themselves. And as you and I know, that there's this narrative amongst Black women that we have to be strong at the expense of our own well-being, right? That we can never let anybody see us sweat. We are robots. Nothing bothers us. And who are we being strong for? We don't even get to center ourselves and decide if we want to be strong today or not. That shouldn't be the expectation on us. And so part of Right Within was to invite women in to say, this is where you can drop the bags. You can choose from here, what you want to do. And I'm curious, when you read that part, what did you think? What did that mean to you?
Oh my goodness. Oh, I absolutely was like, amen, especially because I'm a mom and a wife, and, to show up as a Black woman in America is enough, right? But then you're a Black mom, you're a Black wife. And for me, I was just like, oh my gosh, yes, I will do that. It was like you gave me permission to do it, right? And that's what I loved about the dedication, because I knew immediately that I was going to see myself in the text. I am a voracious self-help and business book reader. And I tell you, you get to the end and you're like, some of this stuff is just not even germane to me. I'm like, I can't do that stuff at work. I can't show up, in that way. And so it gave me permission. And so that's what made me dig into it. And everyone, and then, right. So of course I was voracious in the first book and then also in the second, but at the end of the first one, like I was halfway done and I was ordering copies and handing them out. I was like, this is my sister, my niece, da da da. But yeah, because I wanted them to see themselves in it. I wanted them to get that permission immediately, right? Not wait until you got to my age and you finally got the permission. So yeah,
I'm glad you said that, because like last night I was doing a book tour or book stop in St. Louis in person, and there was a young lady in the audience, and I believe she said she was 27, and she read Right Within, and she said it gave her permission to say, you know what, I don't have to work the rest of my career here. I can do that. And like everybody applauded, because we were like, man, had we have had the courage at 27 to walk and do something different.
Yes, exactly. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that was, I think, Exactly. And it gave me the opportunity to reflect and to say, okay, I can't redo anything, but what can I do right now? How can I show up at this specific point in time? Right. And so I'm so glad that that's what she said, because that was what I was hoping, my sister and my niece. My sister she's 11 years my junior, and my niece is maybe 15 or 16 years my junior. I'm not 100% sure, but I just wanted them to know that work looked different for them. Interestingly enough, my niece, actually both my niece and my sister ended up losing their jobs during COVID. And it really I think the books gave them an opportunity to do that, right? The permission. And so my niece went full on into her catering business, her bakery catering business. And then my sister made sure that she went back and reached back to go for her goal in the theater arts and the dramatic arts. And so they're both doing that now. And so, so tremendous.
That's awesome. I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. And so that actually gets me to the thing, because I think that helped them kind of get to this healing portion, right? Reading the text. So let's talk about that. So you talk in the book about healing, and this is what I love. That's kind of seems like it's like the natural bridge from the memo, because then you get to, okay, now how do we fix all these things we've been through, right? But so when we get to healing, you talk about healing and freedom for women of color in the workplace, and specifically trying to help just understand, one, what does that look like? And then two, why it's important. So talk about that.
Yeah, one of the things that I experienced in the workplace was this feeling of not being free, right? One definition of freedom is no longer feeling confined. And there was not a day I didn't go to work where I didn't feel like I was confined, right? Like I couldn't be myself, like I was walking on eggshells. And I know that some of my colleagues never had to experience that, right? They could be free, they can be the authentic self, good or bad, whatever it might be. And I just never felt that sense of freedom. I always felt like I was holding my breath at any given turn and being under a microscope. And so for me, I wanted to really talk about, and on top of that, being under a microscope, we're being aggressed at certain turns, right? We're being racially aggressed. We're being, sexism, you name the isms. We're also doing those things and doing some of our best work. And so I thought, what could it look like if we were actually free at work? We could actually do some of the best work of our career unrefined and free. And so I wanted Black women of color, anyone who felt constrained in the workplace to be able to think, what could freedom really look like? And for me, it was that waiting to exhale moment, right? That we should have never been exposed to some of the micro and macro aggressions that are in the workplace, but because we have been, it's now distorting how we experience everything else. One of my favorite quotes is by Dr. King, and he said, racism distorts the personality. And I started to really think about that because I was in my former life for 15 years. I experienced racism every single day. So when people say, bring your authentic self to work, Jennifer, I don't know who the heck that is anymore because I don't know that person because I'm so traumatized, but I didn't have the language to articulate it, right? And once I realized that this is not just affecting my life, this is affecting how I go home, how my family experiences me, how people out in the world experiences me. So if I don't heal, it affects the ecosystem. And that's where I was like, you know what, we need some healing, we need some freedom, and we can't normalize this behavior inside the workplace.
Okay, I kept pressing the button and I couldn't unmute. Yes, so it's interesting that you say that too, because I think when it becomes something that's normalized, right, you don't really know that something is different. And it also, okay, so let me say this. It's funny because when I think about it being normalized, I even think about the places in which we're supposed to have respite, right? So I think about church, and I often think about how sometimes the pastor would say, if you got a job, give them the praise, give them the glory. And you like, yeah, I got it. You're in your mind like, I got a job, but it get on my last nerves. These people drive me nuts, right?
Right.
So that is right. And so we don't even realize how we're being conditioned to just accept the fact that, hey, we are gainfully employed, but we spend so much time at our jobs that, but what if you're being targeted, at your job? And so you're dealing with this cognitive dissonance of, well, at least I have one. Yes, but when you're there, there's microaggression, macroaggression. out and out racism, misogyny, sexism, all of those things together. And then when you come home on the weekend, let's say the church either repeats that to you, or you talk to your family members about those things, and maybe they have not, they don't have the type, maybe they don't have a job with a desk and a phone, right? And so they're also now telling you, hey, be happy that you have that, right? So with that in mind, do you think it's even like really possible to heal from racial trauma in the workplace, considering it is so white and male?
I'm so glad you touched on that, because I think we're getting all these, narrative, these commercials from everyone in our life, because everybody has normalized this behavior, right? Just be happy that you have a job, just be grateful, right? And after a while, I started to say, you know what, being grateful is not on the job description. I worked really hard to get to this point, right? Dignity, humanity, respect, those should be table stakes. Those should just be part of working in the environment, because some of our colleagues get that day to day, right? So why should I have to suffer in silence and those sorts of things? And I think, like you said, many of us were just, told, you get that good paying job, girl, you have the good health insurance. And two things can be true at the same time. Yes, I'm gainfully employed, but also I'm being abused in my workplace, right? And I think that as Black people, we're just told, just suck it up. And that is part of the trauma. And so I do think that we can heal, but first we have to be willing to acknowledge. You can't conquer what you're not willing to confront, right? For so long, and I don't know about you, I'd love to hear your experience, but I didn't even want to call those things racism. I didn't even want to utter them out, sexism, right? So knew I was experiencing being treated different, but I didn't even want to say it to myself. And you can't be free if you're not even willing to be honest with yourself.
Yeah, no, I didn't call it that either, because I didn't know that that's what it was, right? Same thing. I didn't have the language for it, so I didn't call it that. I just knew it made me feel weird and or off. I knew that I would go and sit at my desk and I would say, well, why wasn't I invited to that meeting? Or why is this person taking my ideas and showing up, as if they're theirs? Why am I a star performer and receiving EEs, exceptional, right, on my performance report or performance review, and yet I'm either not getting a raise or I'm only getting a cost of living increase, right? And so you don't know that that's what it is, because no one is, when we matriculate through college, right, if that's what you chose to do, no one tells you about that, because that's a dirty little secret. So no one's going to talk to you about what racism looks like in the workplace, because most times people aren't studying it, they're not talking about it, that type of thing. So you don't even know what to look out for. And that is, I think that was my struggle, right? But that's not the struggle that I want to see, right, for young women that are coming after us. So then that leads me to this thought, right? What coping mechanisms have helped you maintain peace and sense of self-worth when when you're faced with these types of issues?
Yeah. One of the quotes that, when I was going through some of the toughest times in my career, I came upon the work of Audre Lorde. And for anybody who's ever paid any attention to anything I do, I can't help but utter her name, because her writing helped me heal in a space where I didn't have the language, didn't have someone who I can necessarily, talk to about it. Because when you're the only one, you're like, you're questioning yourself at every turn. You don't know if it is what it is. And so you're like, let me just try to make it work, right? And so for me, I realized that part of my healing was also, if I don't heal, then I can't pass on tools to the next generation. Right. So right now many of us are using tools to thrive, tools to survive. And so that's passing on that intergenerational trauma. But what would it look like if we had tools of thriving to pass on? And that was so important for me to write with them, because we have to free ourselves from all of this stuff. And so one of the things, I have a lot of tools in the book, but one in particular was the affirmation pyramid that I created to kind of help me. We be being creative on how we get through the day. Some it's music, some it's scriptures or whatever. And one of the things that I used to tell myself, because I thought that some of my colleagues would show up for me in some of these situations, the workplace friends that you have and you go to lunch with, and then when you're in these meetings and things, they're like radio silent. And so I was looking for somebody else to affirm me in these moments. And one thing I learned, that I can affirm myself. It'd be nice if my colleagues would show up and be courageous, but my worth isn't tied to if they show up for me or not. And so quickly, one of the things that I talk about is, number one, when something's happening, pause. You don't have to respond in the moment. You don't have to react, right? And you can think about it. Number two, I had to acknowledge, again, like I said, I was going through years and years, never calling a thing a thing. You know how they'll just say, call a thing a thing. And so I had to finally say, if not to anybody else, but to myself, that Chad harmed me in X, Y, and Z. When he communicates with me, he's harmful to me. So I had to own that and say, this is a harmful situation to me, even if I never say it to him. Number three, document, because part of our issues is we're questioning if it happened or not. Is that racism? So I noticed that to free myself of thinking it's always my problem is I would document it. So now I see if there's a pattern of abuse, a pattern of harm taking place, right? It wasn't just a one-time thing. We know that sometimes people make mistakes. Obviously, there's space and grace. But now I'm like, oh, wait, in Zoom room 10, on last Tuesday, Chad said X, Y, and Z, right? And then I noticed again in an email that he sent 2 weeks later, he said that thing again. So if I ever do want to have a conversation with him or anybody else for that matter, HR, then I'm not saying, oh, I felt like I was racially assaulted. No, here is what happened. I'm rooting the situation in fact, right? So now you can't say Minda's in her feelings. No, you tell me what it is. This is happening. This is a pattern, right? So I'm documenting everything. The other thing is redistributing the energy. I realized that I was ruminating on these situations that were happening throughout the day. And I don't know if we have any people out in the audience that are ruminators, but I used to think about that thing over and over and over again, like a Beyonce song. I would just wear it out. Why did he say that? Why did she say that? You know, what did I do to make them think that they could say that to me? And I would just play it. I'd take it from one meeting to the next meeting to the next meeting. Then I'd go home with it. Many of us are working from home, right? So you move from one chair to the other chair and you're still thinking about it. And I said, you know what? She's not thinking about you anymore. They're watching Jeffrey Dahmer, they're watching whatever it is they're watching, right? You know, but yeah, I'm going to bed with you on my mind. And that chronic stress that I'm using in my body, thinking about that, I had to relieve myself of that. We don't pick up more bags. We let them go, right? That's his bag. I don't have to hold on to that. And then lastly, again, affirm ourselves. Whatever it is you need to tell yourself that you didn't do anything to deserve that treatment. You are good enough for humanity, dignity, and respect. And that's the place where I realized that I could be my self-healer too.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, I'm a ruminator, and I'm a ruminator to the point where I think like everyone in my family is like, Jennifer, shut up, mom, shut up. Like nobody wants to hear that anymore, right? And I'm a texter, like, girl, can you talk right now? And so it's helpful to know that there are actually tools that we can use, right? And documentation is one of them. So when I mentioned my mom earlier, she was in the second wave of the human computers as a coder. And one of the things that she taught me that I never forgot is document everything. And so I do not engage in back and forth. I'm like, yes, per your last email or or I just put things in writing, right? So that we can confirm stuff. And that's just something that always held me over, through my career. And it's some of the things that when I began to mentor younger women that I would say, like, listen, as long as it's written, as long as you have documentation of it, you can, that gets you one step further, right? And then you can kind of get out your feelings. So I just want to remind everyone, I can see questions in our Q&A. If you have them, please queue them up now, drop them in there. We will get to them. I may even, if it's making sense with the flow and it doesn't take us off too much, I'll pull one in, but please leave the questions in the Q&A and we will get to that in our last maybe 15-20 minutes of our conversation. But let's talk about some more about some things that we can do to heal, right? So you reference therapy for sure, and that Jesus can heal you on your couch too. So can you talk about why you chose therapy as a healing tool?
Ooh, child, do we have enough time? But, so for me, I started getting panic attacks and anxiety at work and depression. And I thought it was me, Jennifer. I thought I was losing my mind. I was like, I don't know what's going on with me. But it never dawned on me that it was the environment in which I was in. and then once I started kind of peel it back, I'm like, man, I've been praying, and I do believe prayer is important, but we may need other tools of support. I talk about it in Right Within, having like a healing squad, having your healing advisors. And I was praying this thing, but I also knew that I needed to talk about it. And going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, being strong, for so long, I didn't even talk about the experiences I was having at work, because I had that mentality, man, I got this job, I can pay my bills, and I shouldn't be complaining, right? But my humanity was being like torn apart at every turn just for a paycheck. And I realized that was causing me pain. And then also I realized that when certain people would come into a meeting, when certain emails would come into my inbox, that would give me the panic attack. And so then I'm like, you know what? I started to look into my benefits, and I heard one of my colleagues, who happened to be two white people, and they were talking about how they go to therapy every week. And I thought, we work at the same place, we got the same benefits, right? So I started looking into it, and I thought, I found out that we got 3 complimentary sessions with a mental health provider. And I know the stigma sometime in the Black community, at least back in that time period, it wasn't as talked about as it is now. So when you say therapy, you often hear, when we were growing up, oh, that's for crazy people, or did they take their meds? So we didn't have all of us didn't have quite the education on the breadth of and depth of therapy. And so I thought, well, if they're going and they seem sane, whatever, maybe I can go and talk some of this stuff through, because I don't know what's going on with me. And so I decided to self-diagnose myself and say, you only need 3 sessions. So I took the 3 complimentary EPA sessions, and I realized, I needed more, and I still go. That was in 2008. So, but now it's more maintenance related, but I was nervous. I had a lot of stigma around it. I didn't want to talk about it out loud, because I thought maybe I had failed, because maybe I didn't have enough faith, or whatever the case may be. And once I realized this was just an additional tool, that I could still pray and talk this thing through with someone who understood, who let me have a soft place to land. And I say all that to say is, I feel like Black women, women of color, anybody who feels othered, we need soft places to land. And that created that soft place for me to land, to be able to talk about it. Someone not to tell me that I took it the wrong way, right? That I just got to say what I needed to say. And through having that lens, then I was able to uncover, actually, this is a toxic environment, and I'm in a abusive workplace relationship. And I was able to uncover some of those things.
Yep. I'm shaking my head too, because that is like when you get your benefits package, especially if it's like your first or second job, and you see something on there that says EAP, right? Employee Assistance Program. It almost sounds like calling HR, and it scares people, and they're like, well, I'm not calling HR because they're gonna like blame me or something. And so it's so interesting to me that everything still does need to be explained to people, and we are kind of taking for granted that people get it, and so you don't get it, right? And so that's another place of mentorship, to be able to show up and to say, listen, use your benefits, please use this EAP, exactly, 3 free, and then if you have health insurance that will cover that, and or if it doesn't, or if you have an HSA or an FSA, find a therapist, right? And unfortunately, you may have to meet your deductible, but you got to do what it is you got to do. So take some of your coins out of your paycheck and put it in your HSA, and just squirrel enough aside, just so that you can at least cover a monthly, therapist, right? And these were things that, until I learned them myself, I didn't know that they existed for me, right? And someone had to talk me through them. So there's no shame in even not knowing that. And actually, that we do have a question, and I want to kind of weave it in, because it goes to some place that I want to go to next. So there has been an undercurrent of some conversations that I know we've been having on Twitter, and I know you can see them, where sometimes, unfortunately, some Black women are showing up to the workplace, predicating the same behaviors that have been placed on us to our junior staff and to younger staff. And so the question is, are there any forums, groups, or practice spaces that address how Black women may be taking on the role of the oppressor as other Black women? And or do you have any solutions as to how we can address this? Because it's an interesting one, because this is a conversation that we're kind of skirting around, but also because we Black folks, we don't want our business in the streets. So it's like we're trying to have it, but we're not trying to have it. So what are your thoughts there?
Oh, yeah, we are trying to have it, but we are we're like double dutching with the conversation online. But I'll give an answer, and then I'd love for you to chime in too. So I think this is really important, and I talk a little bit about it in Right With Them, but regardless of who the oppressor is, we need to have the conversation with them. Nobody gets a hall pass for toxic behavior. And because many of us have been in these toxic environments, we start to assimilate into white supremacy culture, and we start to think about and take up some of those behaviors because we've been exposed to them, and those people don't realize that they need healing, right? That now they're part of the problem. And I think that we actually have to have those difficult conversations with people who look like us too. I have too many emails in my inbox from Black women telling me that another Black woman has aggressed them in the workplace. And I always say, talk to them like you talk to Bob, right? So we need to be having the conversation and letting people know, saying what we mean without saying it mean, create the boundary, right? Just like, we jokingly say to each other, I see you, sis. We got to say, I see you, sis. I see you, bro. Like if they're cutting up way, we're not going to do that here. And I'm not going to do this with you today, right? We give them the benefit of the doubt. But again, that documentation, just like we would document something else, let them know that this is not okay. So in the book, I say what you mean without saying it mean, because we got to have these conversations. And I think we give each other hall passes for bad behavior. Just recently, I talked a little bit about it online, that I got hired to be a keynote speaker at this Fortune 500 company. And I was on a call with 5 other people who worked at this company. They chose me to come and do this keynote, which funny enough is tomorrow. And one Black woman on the call, a senior Black woman, she tried to berate me in front of her white colleagues and other, in mixed company. And I was mortified, right? And I could not believe that she would do this to me on this call when I am the talent coming to do this. And at some point at the end of the call, I let her say what she needed to say. And I said, all due respect, but you all came to me and asked me to do this, and I know what my worth is, and I know what I bring to the table. So yes, I may not be like your favorite, this other Black woman that she was telling me that there's no way that I could be a better speaker than her. She was the last speaker, and that it'd be a hard press. And so I said that I feel like I like that speaker, and I feel like I bring something else to the table, to add to the programming that you all are doing. And I had to let her know, we're not going to do this on the call. I said what I said, but in a very nice way, and later on that call, I had another person who was on that call. They sent me a message and they're like, she does that all the time. And it hurt my feelings that this is a person in senior leadership that is representing us, right? and so we cannot take on that, but we need to call it out so that those people are on notice, because we want to move them out just like we want to move any other toxic person out, so that we can have people who are healthy in the workplace. I don't believe in bringing your authentic self anymore. I said, bring your healthiest self. And those are the unhealthy behaviors that I see. And we can't let that perpetuate, but we need to have those conversations.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And I've been victim to that. I remember I think it wasn't my first job, but it was, to me, in my mind, it was my first real job. And I had a sister who was my boss, and it wasn't until hindsight that I was able to reflect, like, wow, she did me kind of dirty. But I learned so much from it, so that I began to start the process of modeling behavior. And so every instance after, even if it was a manager, I would begin to manage up, and as well as my subordinates, where I would just, I really began to model the way in which I wanted people to treat me, right? And so it's, instead of maybe complaining per se about people being unprepared to meetings, I made sure that I was extremely prepared, right? And that I could say, and if they didn't have an agenda, instead of allowing it to upset me, like, oh, they don't have no agenda, I brought the agenda, right? And so I began to structure to say, listen, this is the way in which I would like to relate to you, and I hope that it's something that you can do. And I have been able to move people in that way. And so I think that's helpful too, to be able to offer folks, several different ways that they can, because some people may be non-confrontational and they may think that, oh, but if I say something, they're going to da. But you can speak up, you can model behavior. There are so many ways that we can approach this, right? Before it becomes an issue, before it becomes HR, before it becomes an ulcer, before it becomes hemorrhoids, before it becomes a headache, right? Before it physically manifests itself into our body.
Jennifer, can I add something to what you're saying? All of you hit it on the head. You said boundaries. That's part of what healing is. It's creating the boundary. So many of us have not given ourselves the space to create the boundary. And I know that takes courage, and I know it takes time, and it's a muscle we have to flex, but that's what it is. It's creating the boundary. And I think, at least for me in my former life, and even sometimes in my current life, people will say, I didn't know that was bothering you, or I didn't know that was a thing, right? And I'm at fault because I didn't articulate that was an issue, right? And so I think too, that gives us space to say, we can assume that they're not trying to harm us, but the impact is that. And so just saying, hey, we're in this together, right? We're better when we are together. Let's not be competitors, but let's be collaborators. And I think it's not what you say, but how you say it. And I think if you come in love, right, you show up in the ways that you just said, in the way that you would want someone to approach you, but we can't let these behaviors just sweep them under the rug. I think that's been part of the detriment to our healing and our freedom, is sweeping everything under the rug.
Mm-hmm. We do that. So this is interesting. I want to talk about you. So you just referenced the sweeping things under the rug. So you talk about something in the book called prudent paranoia. What does that mean, and how often is that manifested at work for women of color?
When I found out about prudent paranoia, I wanted to pull out my tambourine and shake it, because again, when we are going through these things, we don't know what to call them, right? No one's talking about them out loud. And we're internalizing all of these things, creating our own narratives about what may or may not be true. And Roderick Kramer, he's a professor, and he came up with this term prudent paranoia, which means the more you worry, the more you notice, the more you notice, the more you worry. And I started to think about that. He wasn't talking about racism, but I started to think about that is the paranoia that many of us are carrying with us into the workplace each and every day. We notice when someone speaks over us in a meeting, right? Or doesn't even ask our input at all, or takes our ideas that we talked about last week and passes it on their own. And now we're worried, right? Oh, what's this meeting? Or I'm always aggressed in a meeting, so I'm worried going into the next meeting, right? Or I'm worried about the next email. And so again, that paranoia causes trauma. And I've just been able to lean into that, because we can't do our best work. We can't be healthy. In Black women in particular, we don't live as long as some of our counterparts due to chronic stress. So that chronic stress can turn into diabetes and high blood pressure and strokes and those things. And I'll be darned if I let the workplace take me out early, okay? They don't deserve that. They don't deserve your life early or not. And so it's really important that we get our tools in our healing, because this is part of our longevity, right? We've worked too hard not to enjoy retirement, not to be able to go on the trips and be rich aunties if we want to, right? But we can't do that with all that paranoia in our body. And again, a lot of right within is just being able to say, wow, let me unpack some of this, right? I didn't realize I had pushed it to the back of my head, and I didn't even realize that I needed to heal, right? And I think part of that is just, again, allowing ourselves that true freedom to breathe and not feel like we're always walking on eggshells at every turn.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's that was something that I was always doing. I would go into meetings, and if I knew the person that would bother me was going to be there, I would already have my armor up, and then I would be defensive, and I would overthink. And you mentioned something earlier about something not being on your job description. That wasn't on my job description either. It's how come I cannot just show up and do my work, right? But yeah, I want to get to retirement. I want to be able to enjoy myself. I want to wear my sarong on my cruise around Europe, right? And it's interesting because you wonder, wonder if you're going to get to that place, because sometimes that, if you're in this type of toxic environment, you don't even know if if you're going to make it, right? If you're going to get to a point where, can I make it to retirement because I'm so, wound up now. So we have a couple more questions in the Q&A. Please give us, drop some more in here. It's 8:10. We're going to be mindful of the time. So we got 20 minutes as we begin to wrap up. So a quick question. So you wrote the book, we know you wrote it, it takes time to publish, and then it takes time to come out. Have you changed anything or have you added anything to your healing process just in the writing of this book and as you prepare for the next thing that you're doing?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. So I'm really just double downing on my boundary setting because I realize that when I don't have hard boundaries, or if I sweep things under the rug, not just in my work but in my personal life too, that I have to be firm in what my boundaries are. You know this, and maybe some people out in the audience know that I love Beyonce, and in one of her songs she says, "I'm the bar," right? And I think about that every day when I wake up. I set my bar for what I'm going to tolerate and what I'm not going to tolerate for the day. And that's part of my healing, right? Knowing what my triggers are. And I think many of us, again, once we get to know ourselves and love on ourselves, understanding what the triggers are so that you have your tools in place to mitigate those things. And so for me, it's just really being very clear and not giving my energy to toxicity, right? At any point in time, if it's somebody, and not being guilty about it. You might see somebody calling you who, every time they call you, it's going to, they're taking the air out of the room, right? I've given myself permission to do not disturb. I'm doing those things for me and not feeling guilty around it. I don't know what this part of our trauma, I think, is the guilt, because we've been told we have to be all things to all people, but not to ourselves. And that's not a selfish thing. That's a selfless thing. And so for me, I'm now centering myself at every turn because I only have one life to live on this earth, right? So I have to make sure that I'm my healthiest, because my healthiest self is my best self.
So while you were talking, I have my phone in front of me, and it reminded me of just when you were talking about writing down your triggers. When Minda says that, she literally means do it. Get a notebook and write these things down. But it made me think about something that I started to do in my notebooks to write down. And I can't remember where I found it, but it was an exercise titled how do I best work? And so in this, you write down, what are my strengths? How do I perform? What are my values? Where do I belong? What is my proposed contribution? And then I this is a note for maybe if you're in the process of looking for a new job because maybe that place was getting on your last nerves, but asking those same questions of potential colleagues and supervisors. What are your strengths? How do you perform? What do you value? How do you plan to contribute? And so just literally having this note and going through that exercise was really helpful for me, because after setting the boundaries and discovering what those triggers are, the next step obviously is to move to a place of positivity. And so then it's okay, well then how do I want to show up to work? What does that look like for me? And what do I value? So that way you're always centering yourself in right within. I felt like that was important for me as a part of my healing process, to answer those questions for myself.
Thank you for sharing that, because that is it. We're all busy doing all the things on the hamster wheel, and we don't get that time just to say, woo, what does my healthiest self look like? What does my next best thing look like? And really honing in, because then we can see that the patterns, then we know we know what tools we need when we need them, right? And that's part of our healing. I always say that healing is not a one-time event, it's a lifestyle. So you have to know what the triggers are, who are the people, the behaviors that are giving you that angst. Or if you're looking for a new job, you know what your old triggers were in the last environment. Ask those questions that align with certain things to get to the root of some of the questions that you need to know in the next space. And so I think all of that is just, it helps you be healthy. And that's what being right within is. How you gonna win if you ain't right within? Our colleagues can go to all the unconscious bias trainings that they want to, but our healing is not predicated on if they go or not, right? We got to center ourselves and do what we got to do for us.
Yes, that's perfect actually too, because once we've, kind of done our work, right? We have a question from the audience that talks about how do we help, young professionals do their work, right? So how do we help our mentees? So the question is, what conversations should we be having with young professionals about trauma in the workplace that they may experience in their future roles? Two-parter. And then how can we ensure that they are well equipped to navigate these spaces in a healthy way without discouraging them from seeking certain careers and professions? Really good one.
That's a great question. And, I'll tackle it, but Jennifer, I'd love to hear your thoughts too. One of the things I would say is I think that for all of our mentees, we should get the memo for them first, whether they are male or female or however they might identify, read that with them and then have those conversations, right? Like last night, my cousin, he's in nursing school in St. Louis, and he came to the book event, and he brought one of his peers with them, and they said, wow, we're experiencing this in nursing school, like the trauma and the experiences, and we didn't really know because they're new to this, right? And how they could start. And I told them, this is the ground that you start to have those conversations with, that you create your boundaries. Use this in school to do it, because it'll be easier when you get into the workplace, when you're flexing that muscle now. So for me, it's let's read the book together. Let's talk about it, right? And then after we read the memo, we read right within, right? And I would even throw in You Are More Than Magic, because I think we just need those spaces and places where we could talk about these things, where we're not suffering in silence, and we have our squad of people who are rooting for us. And think about it, what if all of us would have gotten the memo much earlier, before we entered into the workplace, how we would have been able to thrive in so many more ways, because we wouldn't have had to keep our head down and work really hard and take any kind of treatment for a paycheck, right? And I think that it can be yes, and we can get our good paychecks, but knowing when our expiration dates have hit too, because I think all of those things are important, and it gives us an opportunity to share those experiences and then ask them the question. I think sometimes, in our youth, we're talking at them, but not talking with them, inviting them into the conversation.
Yep. So yes. So the book for the teenagers, right? So I bought it for my daughter, and I don't know if she read it. I'm gonna keep it 100 with you. She's 15. She's not gonna read it right now, right? Not right now. But when she packs her room up and she goes off to college, she's going to be sitting in her dorm one day, and she's going to pull that joker out, and it's going to hit her then, right? And that was the intent. As long as it's present in her vicinity, she'll read it then. But some of the things that I began to do, especially with mentees, and specifically because I have toodled in the nonprofit space essentially my entire career, except for being an entrepreneur. And that is the entrepreneurial industrial complex is real. And if this place will chew you up and spit you out, especially if you're a person with a really, really good heart, because you're showing up to do this work, and they're going to beat you down, and you're not going to get nobody, right? And you're going to be driving a beat up car, and you're going to have holes in your shoes, and you're going to be eating ramen, and you're going to be sad, right, about this work. And so I could easily tell somebody, don't do it, right? But what I don't say that. What I try to ensure that they understand is that your focus should be about, how you want to show up. What do your career goals look like? How can you work on your own professional development? How do you map out a plan for success? So just getting them to take ownership of their work, because again, as I think about it, that's pretty much not what I heard when I was, growing up. I heard, go to college, get a job, and then you get your job. I'm coming from Detroit. People retired from their auto plant job, right? Or died on the, unfortunately. But yeah, you work someplace for 25 something years, and you got your pension, and, whoop-de-whoop, right? But that's not how it's working out. You have to put your money up for your retirement. You have to determine your professional development plan. A lot of these young folks are staying places 2-3 years tops, right? And so I've always tried to get them to just focus inward on what makes them happy. How can they develop themselves? How do they show up with integrity and ethics, to do this work, so that the work doesn't do them, right? And we have another question. Okay, so I'm gonna have to lean in and read this one too. All right, so as a Black woman that is often mistaken for being multiracial or other, I'm getting a great deal of negativity despite celebrating, promoting, and referring other Black women. How might I continue my celebration of Black women's work despite the haters? in this place? That's interesting. And even though that's an individualized question, I'm almost positive that's showing up for some other folks too.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's part of the toxicity of the workplace, right? People don't question when white men and women advance other white men and women. They do it 95.9% of the time, if not more. Right. And they do it without thinking, oh, I have 5 white people on my team. What are people going to say? Right. Like that's just it. They normalized doing that, which is obviously inequitable. But I do think that it's really important for us to be the sponsors for each other. Whenever I get a chance to say it, we don't have to wait on white men and women to say our names in the rooms that we're not in. We can do that for each other, and we should be unapologetic about it. If we're putting the right people in the position that we know are going to soar, we should do that. And so don't feel unapologetic. Don't feel apologetic about it. Be unapologetic about it, and continue to give those opportunities to people who look like you and celebrate them. I was speaking a couple weeks ago in Louisville, Kentucky, and there was a white woman. She was on an allyship panel, and she said that, you know, after the murder of George Floyd, they really doubled down on making sure that they had Black women and women of color in more leadership roles. And so she decided to hire her whole leadership team. She had open positions because she got created a new line of work, and she didn't do it on purpose, but she ended up, after she filled all the positions, they were all Black women. And then those Black women hired other Black women. And she said her team is the most is the most productive team, like out of all the working teams. And everybody in the room like clapped, right? And she's like, diversity is important. She's like, prior to George Floyd, I wasn't really looking at it that way. And she's like, I'm so glad now that they hired other people who happen to be Black, but they are good at their jobs, right? And so if you're hiring good talent, then continue to promote, because if we don't do it, who else is going to do it? So we give you your flowers for doing that. And when we put people in, we're putting the right people in, that we're going to do it and we're going to nail it. Like Hamilton, we're not going to give away that shot. And so we just have to normalize that being a thing. And so don't let those, create those spaces, come to communities like ours and online, so that you can be affirmed that you're continuing to do the right thing, because we can be each other's best advocates.
Yes. So that is so interesting too, because I think just talking about being an advocate in the workplace is crucial. But as we know, sometimes it doesn't, like some of our best efforts are just like they're futile. But we still need to show up, right? Because guess what? We got bills. So what do we do? What do women of color do if we just cannot leave our toxic manager or our employer, yet we still want to prioritize our healing?
Yes. So listen, we want to support source booksellers. So make sure you order a copy of the paperback through them tonight or tomorrow this week. Make sure you do that. But I think, so there's a chapter in the book called Healing While in Hell, because the reality is we're not all able to leave tonight, right? We can't all send the resignation letter in the morning. But the one thing that I realized when I was in a toxic workplace, I couldn't leave because I had bills and all the things, but I started to take an enemy state of mind, like these people are trying to kill me, they're after me, all this kind of stuff. And I moved to a empire state of mind, like I can make it anywhere. And now I'm not going to center these people, I'm going to center myself. How do I make work for me? Because I've been trying to make it work for everybody else and they don't give a darn about me, right? So how can I make it work for me? So one of the things that I would do was lean into professional development stipends. What certifications could I get? What stretch assignments could I ask for? Because I was preparing for my next best thing. I took public speaking classes on my company's dime. You know, I went to the conferences that I wanted to go to on their dime. And I did all of those things. I created a new title for myself. I asked for certain things. I did all the things that prepared my next resume jump. And so I centered myself and my needs and my goals once I got clear on what they were. And then I also practiced in that environment, having clear boundaries and reestablishing them, right? Because I knew I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life at this place. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to say what I mean without saying it mean. I'm going to when Bob tries to touch my hair, now we're gonna actually have a conversation about this, right? And I use that as my playground to build my confidence again, that it had chipped away at me, so that when I left that place, I had all the things I needed. And once we kind of put a different lens on things, you're able to see things a lot differently. You're no longer trying to impress everybody, but you're like, what am I going to do for me? And that's one way that really, really helped me refocus. And listen, I use that public speaking each and every day now in my life.
Listen, hello. That's really the cheat code. It's so funny to hear you say that too, because again, I think until we share these stories, we don't really know that other people are having the same types of issues, right? So I remember when you were talking about that, it reminded me of a place. It wasn't a toxic place, interestingly enough. It was a very loving place, but it was a toxic external environment because it was the recession of 08 to 09. And I just started working at a large library system that was rooted in the county government seat. So we definitely had some great benefits, and we got some we had huge budget cuts, and they gave everybody a pink slip basically, and then they spent like a month or two making the decisions, and I was like, what the heck? So I was like, okay. When I tell you I took every professional development, every kind. I mean, even like packing your email down in Adobe and Outlook. I was like, that was like an hour-long or 2-hour-long class, something, but I took it. And it was interesting because that's what something flipped for me at that time, where I was like, okay, wait a minute, I really do have to take care of this for myself. But yes, you skill up, right? You skill up for the thing that you want to do next. And so at that point in time, I was my own professional development department, right? Every time I had an opportunity, I took advantage. They give you $1,000 or $2,000, use every stinking penny of that 1,000, 2,000, however much you have. Take every class you can. And so in that, after 09, after that thing happened, I ended up earning an accreditation in public relations. I have a GUGAB or certificates, and I am certified in human-centered design now, because I've taken control of my career. I didn't let anyone else tell me, oh, Jennifer, you should learn this, you should learn that. I got back into coding again. I did all of these things that by the time, and I wasn't laid off, thank God, but by the time I was ready to leave the building, I was able to walk into the university classroom part-time, and then open Color Stock. And so I was able to launch my startup from all of the things, all of the volunteering and saying, I'll do this or I'll take this class, from being in an environment that wasn't necessarily the healthiest at the time. So that is a cheat code. Please do that. So it is 8:28. I think we're getting ready to kind of close it up. I'll bring Source Booksellers back on, and yeah.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Jennifer. Give you your flowers. I could not come to Detroit and not do this with you. So thank you so much for everything and how you show up and they have supported me over the years. Truly appreciate you.
You are more than welcome. Thank you.
I was on mute. Well, thank you both. Happy book birthday, Minda. I love how yellow this is.
There's something therapeutic about the yellow.
Yes. Both covers are beautiful, but happy book birthday today. And I want to thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you for your conversation. We're definitely going to have to learn about Color Stock and what we do.
Well, we'll talk offline. Unfortunately, Color Stock has sunset, but it does not mean that the intent and the value and the purpose was not exhibited from the work. But we'll make those connections. But Detroit Human Capital is functioning.
Okay, then we'll have to connect with that for sure. So I want to thank you, and my call to action is to purchase your copy of Right Within. So it's available at Source Booksellers in store and online at Source Booksellers online, or at any indie that will hold this title. Please support this work, and it's so important for all women of color who work anywhere, but especially corporate America.
Thank you for the support of the bookstore. Thank you so much. One day we'll do this in person, but appreciate you too. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right. Good night,
Have a
everybody.
good night, everyone.